Okay. So welcome to our webinar here at Expedient. My name is Jim Gehring. I am a digital strategist / evangelist for Expedient. And today we're going to talk about remote productivity. It's not remotely difficult. Yes, that's an intentional pun. And just a little housekeeping before we get going. If you have any questions during the webinar, please enter them into the Q&A panel there. It's that spot that's marked there on the screen. It should be down in the lower part of your Zoom screen. And this is being recorded. You'll get a recording afterwards. If you want to review any part of this, it'll be available to you once we get there. Oops. Go ahead, Doug.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Doug Theis. I am Director of National Strategy with Expedient. I speak to IT leadership regularly and lead a couple of peer groups, and I'm a big fan of IT strategy. My associate, Jim Gehring, is a digital strategist for Expedient. He talks IT strategy every day and loves to talk to leaders as well. Both of us have a lot of miles on us. We have years of experience bringing practical wisdom to new innovation. COVID made VDI cool again. You probably already know that. There was a silver lining of the pandemic. There was actually quite a few, but many companies made a big move to some sort of remote work in March of 2020, or maybe shortly thereafter. A lot of success, frankly. They were forced to quickly move to home, and in most cases, it worked well. Collaboration tools like Zoom and Teams got a lot of use, and we found out that people can work from home and be productive, and it actually gave us the opportunity to hire better as we realized that good workers didn't have to be in the city or in the office to be effective. However, not everything turned out as beautiful as it needed to be. Many times pandemic VDI looked a lot like the duct tape on this car, set up quickly, not designed to be permanent, or there was no VDI at all. There may have been some substitutes like remote desktop services or just VPN connectivity into the data centers where they were running traditional legacy apps across the wire and maybe suffered from performance issues. What a lot of people found out was the work that they did was not easy to maintain. And even people who had large VDI implementations often found themselves at a loss for how to manage the complexity of these environments. Security holes have always been a problem with VDI, and even though it is usually a radically centralized infrastructure, security problems are amplified more and more these days as bad actors are really attempting to get to the endpoints rather than getting to the core. The licensing always becomes a question. Most of our VDI is pretty clear on licensing now, but things like RDS and some of the other technologies can be very complex. And a lot of the people that we know who have VDI are ready for a license refresh.
Yeah, absolutely. And just as a side note, since it's been 2 years since we got hit with this fender bender, we're now having new problems in a hybrid workforce. I mean, people are going back to the office, but they're doing that in a hybrid style, a little bit of work at home, a little bit of work in the office. And it's kind of unusual to get in and sit down at your office and then have a day full of Zoom meetings, or to be at home and to be working with a few people at the office and try to see the whiteboard that they're working on. So, of course, this is bringing up new problems, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the landscape, this kind of renewed vigor of VDI, and how it's playing into the needs for today after 2 years of COVID and beyond because of the new hybrid work, I would say, demand. So, Doug, what do you think? Why are people doing it?
It's not much different than the first go around with VDI back in the early 2000s. The ability to enable remote work is still a key issue. I actually think it's more important now than ever because of the war on talent and the difficulty to find the right talent from an IT technology perspective in market. Many people are reaching further. Second in this, at 25%, is radical centralization of security. Those threats are increasing every day, and security is one of the key issues. Third is flexible work from any device. What we're seeing now is that many companies are using VDI to enable a bring your own device initiative, or even if they're not considering bring your own device, or what's commonly known as BYOD, they like the idea of a radically consistent work experience, whether an employee is in the office or whether they're at Starbucks or whether they're working at home.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because pre-COVID, a lot of VDI was in place, but typically for a very small amount of people. And most often what I've seen is contractors or developers that are outside the organization, onshore or offshore, need access to systems. And they naturally want to put some things in place to protect the data as well as some other things. So it's not, I think it's part of that first 2 points, ability to enable remote work and secure company data are today now one thing. I mean, we went from protecting most of our data inside the four walls of our buildings to having to protect the four walls of every person out there. It's a new and more complex environment. So speaking of which, I'd like to dive in a little bit on that complexity. So today in the market space, we're going to talk about three specific types of options that you have: a DIY, a hyperscale, or an as a service. Regardless of the one you choose, the battle that you're taking on here is VDI in any infrastructure, a layering of challenges that are, as it's put here, a crushing complexity. So if you think about it, with the new security requirements that are there, with the need to have the redundancy, because the need for hybrid work has become very important. It's now up there on the level of priority of other critical applications in the organization. So all these components that make up what you have to take care of are now very critical. Infrastructure, your network, your software, not just what makes it run, but how do you manage it? How do you monitor it? How do you administer it? That's usually not done with the single tools that you get to get yourself up and running with. Security, this is not your grandfather's security. It's not firewall and ransomware. You know, there's single sign-on, there's multi-factor authentication, endpoint security, which should cover some good log collections, firewalling, microsegmentation. This gets really complex, and that's the direction it's going to continue to grow, given the problems with ransomware. So add to that backups, DR, the need to scale, the need to have redundancy. This is the battle. This is the real battle that we're fighting. And with most IT teams where the mantra, do more with less, hasn't gone anywhere for years and years, and is still the mantra for most organizations, we have a lot we're trying to accomplish in getting this set up properly. Any thoughts there to add, Doug?
Just VDI is unique in that we're combining data center professionals with endpoint professionals. It's one of the most complex infrastructures in the environment.
Yeah, absolutely. So as mentioned before, there's multiple ways to do this. Of course, you can get a pickup truck and do it yourself. And that's certainly one way to do it. And it can be done very well. The only thing is it takes a lot to get it done, as we said before. And there's also hyperscale, which is not as much a full service as it is providing certain portions of what you need in the infrastructure to get stuff done. And in some cases with certain hyperscalers, more than less. And then there's as a service, which is, you know, a cloud provisioned VDI platform that provides the services, provides the backups and the DR, that has the options for security, et cetera, to build things out, and the people, process, and tools to manage those things in the back end. We'll talk about how that's helpful relative to a split of duties here, a divide and conquer approach, if you will, here as we get through this.
When it comes to do-it-yourself or legacy VDI challenges, many of you already have virtual desktop infrastructure and know a lot of the challenges around this. Typically, it's a second unique stack of equipment, either in your internal data center or at your colocation facility. So there's server storage and data compliance concerns in that infrastructure. There's the care and feeding of that infrastructure, the patching and maintaining of that VDI infrastructure, in addition to the normal server infrastructure. One of the more common problems that we see as time goes on and as VDI infrastructures age is that latency and application performance problems tend to get worse over time, if not well maintained. The consistency of experience is another issue that Jim brought up, and could be one of the major challenges for people. The idea that a subset, VDI is often delivered to a subset of users who are permanently remote, like contractors or application developers, and sometimes only given to special end users, road warriors that are internal users. So many times their experience is radically different if they're inside the building versus working from home. And then as we visited again and again, end user security and the weight of the IT team's support efforts when they're already stretched thin. We're seeing most of the turnover we're seeing from our perspective as an infrastructure services provider is around the infrastructure teams. We're seeing a lot of shuffling on those teams right now, people moving to different organizations. So it's tough to maintain talent. It's even tougher to maintain talent in a silo like VDI.
Yeah, absolutely. And then if you look at cloud commodity versus the as a service model, this is where there's a big difference between what hyperscale can offer you. It sounds good, and in theory, that's what cloud is supposed to be, as a service. But when we talk about all the complexity that's involved in this, you can see, really clearly that in an as a service model, you're going to get a lot more, and starting with, performance tuning and assessments. Just getting to know what you need to do to get into the cloud is probably one of the most important pieces. And it's not just performance tuning to get yourself there, it's performance tuning on and on afterwards. This is one example of a number of places where when you go into AWS or Azure, you're going to have to get your own tools to do some of these things. So if you notice, Azure has a few more rows here filled out nicely, but as an example, in the audio video offload, so this is something you want from your VDI. You don't want your Zoom or WebEx, et cetera, Teams calls running back through to the host systems and out. You want the laptop that's running it to handle that traffic directly through its internet, skipping that and coming back. You're saving all kinds of resources in all kinds of ways. Azure does that, but with Windows endpoints only. So if you have Mac users, that's going to be a problem. And when it comes to being VMware powered, that's an option, but it's not their primary option. So if you want to just port your Horizon images over here, golden images or otherwise, to an as a service platform like Experience, which uses VMware as a cloud provider, call it infrastructure as a service, you've got something that's ready to go. You can just bring them over here, import them, and start setting them up for running. With 100% SLAs and the kinds of egress fees being avoided through the services of a cloud provider like Expedient, then there's many, many advantages to doing this. Yeah, anything to add to that, Scott?
Just a couple of notes. The egress fees are often a shock. I think it's great that AWS and Azure have released desktop as a service products. I think it's validating the fact that this technology and this approach to supporting users makes sense. And we've known that for years with products like Citrix and Horizon. They just have limitations. They're relatively new platforms right now. And frankly, the egress fees alone are enough to shock most users who do proofs of concept into considering other alternatives.
Yeah, exactly. So to emphasize that a little further, then let's go into what it means to use those relative to division of labor, so to speak, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. This really describes the as a service as Expedient delivers it when it comes to VDI. We build the infrastructure in our facility. We actually stood up a purpose-built VDI infrastructure that, just like clients, is separate from our VMware cloud production infrastructure. It is a multi-tenant version of Horizon based on VMware. And as you can see, we're taking care of the underlying infrastructure, the data centers that sit below the infrastructure itself, the VMware Horizon licensing, the care and feeding of that environment with support and patching, the SLA. We have tons of redundancy in our environments. So we're as much as N+6 on some of the equipment and some of the different components. And then the performance management, which is one of the more difficult parts for clients to manage themselves. That's not saying we're doing everything. It is still up to the client or their MSP or a third-party partner, which we can recommend if a client doesn't have it, to make sure that their applications and the images they create in VDI match up with their application portfolio and their user stratification, their AV and optimization setup for their graphics intensive tools, and the user profile and configuration management. Most clients we talk to start out with 3 gold images for 3 categories of users and quickly end up with 30 because they find out that there's so many different needs and everybody wants their own image. The ideal situation is probably somewhere between 3 and 30. It just depends on the size of your company. But most of our clients have the expertise in-house for their application portfolio and for what their users are expecting. So we find that by giving them more time, by offloading the work of the underlying infrastructure, the clients can stay focused on the application portfolio and the quality of experience to their end users.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way we like to put this, whether you're in the VDI or the cloud world, multi-cloud's a reality. When we use the term multi-cloud, we don't just mean multiple cloud providers. If you're not using cloud just as a destination you're getting to, but as an approach, as an operating model, then you start looking at your existing platform, whether it's on-prem or in a colo center, as part of your cloud strategy, if you will. And the important thing about that is that you want to bring everything up to snuff. And it certainly becomes a problem when moving to the cloud, that not only do you have to go through that migration process, but if you think about it, and the term refactoring is commonly used for what you need to do when you're doing application refactoring, if you're going to move your VDI environment into the cloud, just like any other portion of your software platform that you're moving there, unless, of course, you're actually doing cloud native programming, if you're just lifting and shifting up things up there or putting your VDI up there, you're going to have to refactor how you do high availability, how you do backups and disaster recovery. From an operations perspective, the tools that you use to monitor it, to administer it, and so on and so forth. And if you're doing a DIY, those things, not only do you have to do them on a regular basis, you have to refresh them. So if I have a slew of tools that are doing all that work, I literally have a job refreshing things over time that takes up a lot of cycles. Speaking of which, this is something we find to be so relevant right now. And this is a great article, actually research that was done by Google that Forbes put out. How tech debt is something that's really a silent killer in the background of making progress. And the research showed that people are losing 1.6 times productivity in what they're doing. Let me put that into hours terms because it's much clearer. It's working in an environment with technical debt And if you're struggling to keep up with things as opposed to leveraging cloud solutions and as a service providers, you would need to work 64 hours to make up for your peers in an optimized environment who are working 40 hours to get the same stuff done. When we talk about that divide and conquer, the important thing we're trying to say is here, where can you do that? What would make sense? So if you have people on-prem, as Doug was showing in that previous slide, where you want people working is focusing on the nuances of the applications and the people within your organization. So one easy split is that underlying infrastructure. If you can get somebody to lay all that out for you and make things work so that you can do the job of keeping people optimally running to do the work that they have to do for the organization, why wouldn't you? Any thoughts, Doug?
Just that, that 64 versus 40 hours, that's a 37.5% tax on technical debt. And the CIOs I've been talking to about this in the last 2 months are concerned. They see the army of people it takes to maintain this infrastructure in a DIY fashion. And many of these infrastructures are 5, 7, 10 years old. And they're aware of the technical debt associated with it. So to offload that infrastructure is one of the easiest ways to erase technical debt in their infrastructure.
Yeah, freeing up resources and creating a great opportunity to put them to better use. So, Doug, I'll let you run with this.
Yeah, the VDI Without Compromise, when we look at the products that we are now delivering to the clients and the interest they have in that, the fact that we're managing their desktop infrastructure as a service and that we're doing the tough work of patching and maintenance and keeping the environment up and running in a resilient fashion while protecting their data and eliminating upfront capital expense, we're really offloading a ton of work from them. The assessments that we do to determine if the as a service model makes the most sense are no charge. It gives us a very simple way to help clients determine whether this infrastructure is right for them. And because we don't do egress charges, the monthly cost is predictable. Not only that, it supports Windows 10 and soon to be Windows 11. So it's familiar and they can really take advantage of the modern operating systems they need at the desktop level.
Yeah, absolutely. And we take this a step further. So on top of the standard bundle that you just saw, we also offer a full security desktop bundle. Now, this is something that has all these components available to you here. So the single sign-on, the multi-factor authentication, endpoint security, firewalls, et cetera, even micro-segmentation. So these are all available in a bundle so that all this stuff is taken care of for you. There's zero admin patching on this. We take care of all this for you. And the platform is scalable. It's one of the biggest things you want to get out of this. And one of the biggest things I think that's of greatest value, Expedient takes a look at cloud not as here's our platform, but that we're a part of a bigger picture. Multi-cloud is the reality right now. So we offer these tools in that multi-cloud structure so that you can use these firewalls, not just for your VDI environment, but for your on-prem and for your hyperscalers as well. You can use the micro-segmentation that way. This isn't just for the end user endpoints. If you wanted to use this in your server environment, you could extend it into that area as well. So we don't know of anybody else right now that's offering a bundle like this on top of the standard services. And this takes a lot more weight off of people's backs when you're trying to do more with less and trying to get your own internal staff trained up so that their skills are better matching what's coming at everybody these days.
How do we get started? It is typically with these no charge assessments. The one that's probably most pertinent for this conversation is the VDI sizing tool. We work with you to do some measuring of your environment to make sure that the VDI sizing is right sized to begin with, but gives you enough room to grow and change over time. In addition to the VDI sizing assessments that we do ransomware assessments, cloud optimization, and cloud storage assessments, which isn't listed here, but is one of our newer platforms. So we can help you decide what the best platform is for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a couple of questions we're going to answer. Before we do, I just want to say there's multiple ways to engage us when it comes to VDI or most things inside of cloud. We have a full cloud stack service offering here, but we like to offer you different ways to get to know us, to figure out how we could work together, starting with briefing sessions and casual conversations with executives and or thought leaders in the technology arena, workshops, which get a little more into the weeds, but not all the way down there. So if you want to look at a specific arena, bring your thought leaders and our thought leaders to the table to discuss something that the sponsor specifically is looking at / targeting. We can facilitate that conversation with a few upfront interviews and make it very productive, providing some actionable intelligence at the end of that workshop. If you're ready to get going, we do the assessments as we just discussed. And of course, if you just want to get to know us, we'll go golfing. We love to do that. We shoot skeet, we fish, but we're happy to meet for a cup of coffee or at your office or over lunch. So there's all kinds of ways we can get started with that.
We've got 4 questions right now in the queue. I'll take the first one, Jim. And listeners, we may go a little long so we can get these questions answered. We appreciate you attending. First question, Michael Ralph, since end users will require a managed device to access VDI, wouldn't this double the number of endpoints required to secure one user plus one workstation, or one user, their workstation, and the VDI user? Michael, it could. VDI, however, can enable a bring your own device initiative. So what we're seeing is a lot of clients taking older equipment and keeping it in place for remote users so that they can access the VDI infrastructure, or others are just allowing their end users to use the equipment that they have on hand, maybe their own personal Mac or their own PC, at a certain level. I mean, there's certain minimum requirements. Licensing can be challenging. That's actually one of the areas that we discuss as a result of the assessments, is what's the ideal situation for licensing and for hardware management over time. Second question, Joseph Longway, does Expedient offer cyber insurance policy? No, we don't, Joseph, although we talk about cyber at almost every meeting these days. As you probably know, cyber insurance renewals are causing IT teams to drop everything and either implement something like multi-factor authentication or encryption, putting those things at the top of the list just to get renewal. And a lot of companies are just not renewing cyber policies. Yeah. So we feel your pain on that.
I would love to add to that, in that what we're seeing is that it's hard to even find it from insurance policies, period, end of story. And the ones that are still giving it to you, allowing you to renew, are upping the price sometimes 4 times what they were charging you the previous year. So this is something that's we're going to watch evolve here over the coming years. So what is Expedient using for endpoint security? I believe we're using Elastic for endpoint security. Doug, additional things we do there?
The product used to be called Endgame, and it was an acquisition from Elastic. I believe that's on its way to be sunsetted, and I believe the new product is called Sentinel. I probably screwed that up, but it is an Elastic. It's an Elastic sourced product.
Yeah. And is there still a minimum number of users per client? I believe we were at 30, Doug?
That's right, 30 end users, which is very low for this VDI as a service model. The typical ones that we've seen out there are in the 100 range. So I think as an MSP, Al Fahimi, I think it would be, I don't know what size your clients are, but there is at 30, we find that it's a lot more accessible to a lot more of our MSP clients.
Yeah, and the question on VDI, working phone systems, contact centers, yes, actually that's an ideal scenario for VDI because the images that are used by the contact center agents is so consistent that the way they operate inside of a VDI environment is very, very efficient.
Patrick, thanks for commenting about iGel. It's a great endpoint. You know, this is kind of the modern version of the old thin client we used to talk about back at the dawn of the age of VDI and virtualized applications. And Patrick not only knows a guy, he is the guy when it comes to iGel. So yeah, great product over there. Robert Butcher, can VDI work on phone systems and contact center? It can. There are plenty of caveats around that. There is some complexity, as you can imagine, around that. But yes, the answer is it can. We would have to take a deep dive into your environment to make sure that we can match up well with that.
Yeah. By the way, I know Jed Ayers from iGel. I actually worked with him a number of years back. Great guy, fantastic company. Any other questions?
Looks good. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have questions, please contact Jim or me.
Yep. Thank you.